The session is about Islamic finance. I have to say, for somebody who has spent most of their life in the City of London, Islamic finance comes as something that is rather new to the agenda. But of course, it shouldn't be something that we think about as being new. Anyone who has studied the traditions of finance will understand that people have often looked to their religious faith to think about how it is that finance can be purposeful in what it is that it's doing. And I suspect, therefore, that there is a lot for us to learn in the West about how our finance can be thought of as having proper purpose, and for Islamic finance to hear about how it is that that incorporates the real challenges of financing a sustainable world. To moderate that discussion, I have Hugh Whelan, who I'm sure many of you will know as the editor of Responsible Investor, the messenger of Responsible Investor for the last decade, and a fantastic panel from across the Middle East, and I think from London as well. But I'll hand over to you, Hugh. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, David. Welcome to this panel before lunch. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in the United Arab Emirates, and specifically here in Dubai, to participate in the Global Roundtable of the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative. As David mentioned, my name is Hugh Whelan. I'm a long-time finance journalist for the last 20 years, working for newspapers at various times, including the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, and a number of other media organizations. Latterly, for the last 10 years, running a company that I co-founded called Response Global Media, and we publish a daily newswire called ResponsibleInvestor.com. And we also publish a print magazine called ESG Magazine, which you can find handily in the lobby. Please do go and grab a copy, take a look. There's some really interesting work that we did on the G20, recent G20 meeting in China around sustainable finance. And we are going to be hearing from a fascinating set of speakers around what I think is one of the most interesting topics out there at the moment. And we've titled this panel, Values to Value. And effectively it translates very well from the faith side of values through to the investment side of value. And we've heard some great references this morning to the way that sustainable business and sustainable finance can be great value creators. This particular panel looks at green and sustainable Islamic finance. And to give just a very, very quick backdrop to this discussion, if you look at the volume of Sharia-compliant assets out there in the world today, it reaches something like 2 trillion in assets. And that sum is due to reach 3.2 trillion in assets by 2020. It's a huge volume of money. If you make the bridge then between Islamic finance and socially responsible investment, which is where many people in the sort of sustainable finance world have been in the past and came from, a lot of the linkage there has been around the exclusionary side of finance, looking to marry those values and avoid doing the investments that don't meet those values. That's very much moved forward, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, to become a sort of mainstreaming, a so-called mainstreaming of values in a financial value context. And particularly, that looks to marry economic, finance, and social needs, which sit very much at the heart of Islamic finance. And I don't think there's anywhere at the moment that could be seen as being more relevant as in green finance. And we have a real, I'd like to say, a sort of star-packed panel of speakers today, which we do, who are going to look at some of the questions that we have around where green and sustainability issues are within Islamic finance. I'm going to very briefly introduce them just by name and title, really, so that we can get the discussion going. To my left, it's a great pleasure to have Mr. Abdullah Al-Awar. Abdullah is the CEO for the Dubai Islamic Economy Development Center. It's great to have Abdullah here. To the left of Abdullah is Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz, someone who will be well known to many of you in this audience, the former governor of the Bank Negara in Malaysia, and she's been doing some very exciting work with the RFI Foundation, the Responsible Finance Institute, of which we will hear more later. It's great to have Dr. Zeti here with us today. Next to Dr. Zeti, we have, let me just check where we are, Mr. Tirad Mahmood, CEO for the Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank. Great to have Mr. Mahmood here. Next to Mr. Mahmood, we have Omar Salim, CEO of Arabesque Asset Management. Great to have Omar here. And at the far end, fabulous to have Nida Raza, who's the Director of Asset Management and Advisory Services at the ICD, the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector. Great to have Nida here with us. We're going to start by giving a little bit of context around Islamic finance for those who may be less aware of exactly what the philosophy is behind Islamic finance and where the overlap lies with green Islamic finance. And I'd like to pass over to Abdullah to talk to us about the philosophy and the rules very quickly that define Islamic finance and how that crossover works. We'll go on to Dr. Zeti afterwards. Abdullah, over to you.
Thank you, Hugh. Well, at the outset, I mean, personally, I think Islamic finance, if you look at the sector, and if you look at the various principles, standards, and products that define that sector, one can easily argue that the entire sector itself is actually sustainable and green. There is no doubt, and you must have heard this many times, that the values and underlying principles of Islamic finance products tally well with those of ethical and responsible finance. So at the outset, I believe the similarities are tremendous. They're huge, and especially if we look at the various trends. Given the global financial crisis that occurred in 2008, I believe that gave rise to a lot of the sectors that we call and we refer to as the Islamic economy sectors. But in essence, the fact that the tenets of Islamic finance as a sector and the other Islamic economy sectors were strong was proven through the fact that it got sustained over the last 6 to 7 years, and actually was growing over the last 5 and 6 or 7 years following the financial crisis. So that's a very strong indicator, in my view, that Islamic finance and the broader Islamic economy sectors are one of the key ways to have a sustainable development going forward. But you may ask yourself, what is responsible finance? The way I see it, responsible finance, the reason I'm saying Islamic finance matches well with these principles is that it's because the responsible finance is not only about the financial aspect or the products achieving sustainability, but also it's about corporate governance. Also it's about proper governance of institutions within this sector, and I think all together can lead to sustainable development. The way I see it, Islamic finance projects should be geared towards developing other sectors, the real sectors of the economy. There has to be that linkage. You referred, I think, to earlier to the size, $2 trillion in terms of assets. Okay, given one can argue, given the conventional financial universe, that might not be that big, but still within the Islamic finance sphere, that is quite a significant number. We should ask ourselves how much of that is being really invested in developing the other real sectors, of the economy. That's, in my opinion, also part of sustainability and part of sustainable development, but also something that Islamic finance is well positioned, to achieve. So,
Abdullah, just a quick question: how often do these concepts get talked about in Islamic finance? When you're at Islamic finance events, corporate governance, sustainability, are these the kind of things that are on the agenda?
Well, to be honest, now it is all the time the case. We see, from my view, I see a lot of discussions about how responsible and ethical finance can be bridged, to Islamic finance. A lot of the institutions are now labeling, from a pure marketing and branding perspective, are labeling their products differently and linking it more to ethical and responsible sectors. So yes, the discussions around this is happening quite a lot. More so, I think. Even foreign governments and jurisdictions are adopting and realizing that connectivity between Islamic finance and responsible investment. And last year the UN Secretary General himself, in launching the report for humanitarian aid, highlighted that Islamic finance is an ideal tool to raise financing for humanitarian activities. So that's one of the ways where you can actually realize that the connection, is there.
Let's go over to Dr. Zetti now. I want to sort of flip the question around a little bit and ask how can green and sustainable finance ideas translate into the social goals of Islam and the financial rules of Islamic law? How do they correspond, coming from the other direction, if you like,
Right. Well, when we discuss green financing, it's all about financing sustainable investments that encourage a sustainable economy. And therefore, in the broader sense, when we talk about green financing, it is not limited to climate financing. It is more broader in taking into account the evolving a more sustainable economy. And this is not inconsistent with Islamic finance, and I want to elaborate a little bit more on why Islamic finance is a sustainable form of financial intermediation, because one of the basic tenets of Islamic finance is its linkage to the economy. You cannot have a financial transaction which doesn't have an underlying economic transaction, and therefore there's no disconnect between Islamic finance and the economy. You cannot, for example, discourage over leverage. You cannot have financial flows that are in excess of the underlying assets. So this linkage, and during the global financial crisis, of course, you saw how there was a disconnect between finance and the economy. Finance became a sector on its own rather than to be of service to the economy. And therefore, now there's great efforts to re-anchor finance to supporting the economy, that being a more sustainable form of financial intermediation. And the other aspect, which has also been mentioned, that it is based on profit sharing, and therefore the risk is shared and the governance process is implicit, and therefore risk management and sound governance is already embedded in it. And therefore, when we look at the goals of Islamic finance of enhancing economic well-being and so on, it's not inconsistent with the goals of sustainable finance and green finance. However, one point that I do want to mention is, when we talk about then, why has probably Islamic finance not drawn in this green financing? But this is not unique to Islamic finance. It is a challenge being faced even in conventional finance. There are many impediments that result in slow progress to financing green financing. And the first being the lack of awareness, and therefore everyone has a role, not only the regulators and governments and the private sector, to bring a greater awareness of what green financing is, and the role of the importance of economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and in the world that we want to live in. And the second one is to have great clarity on the outcomes to be achieved by these green investments. There isn't enough assessment, and especially when you want to draw in private sector in these kind of investment activities, they are concerned about the viability of these investment activities. And therefore assurance needs to be given. Otherwise, you want to be assured that whether you are able to deliver the quality and quantity of the investment that is being made. And then finally, of course, we want to be assured that the management of the project itself. These are projects with very long gestations, and therefore during the life cycle of the project, from when it is being implemented and during its life cycle, you want to be assured that it is being effectively managed, and its risks and the whole governance process is also a risk management and governance process is in place.
Great, thanks for that, Dr. Zeti. We'll come back on some of those points because I think they're very they're fundamental to this discussion. But let's try and make the leap into the financial product side of things. Obviously, that's where customers of financial institutions are able to act as part of that response to issues like climate change. But I'd like to ask Mr. Mahmood to talk a bit about the development of Islamic financial products, how that market is changing, and where sustainability comes into that in terms of the clients that you have. Are you seeing this bridge being made amongst your client base between traditional Islamic finance and this broader concept of sustainable investment, or are they just the same thing?
Thank you for the question. I'm just going to talk about it in my own way, if you don't mind. The issue is not about finance. I think globally speaking, the way capital is being invested and the way profits are being made over the last couple of centuries has contributed a great deal to the erosion of sustainability in many, many different respects. You know, we have deforestation problems in Latin America and Asia, and that is basically very, very dangerous for the air, for the climate. And why is it happening? This is a money-making business to cut down the forests. So if we look at the businesses around the world, the way profits are being made around the world, that is part of the issue. And unless we look at sustainable, the sustainable factor and have it embedded in all regulations that govern industries and corporations and the way money is being made, we are heading for a disaster. I mean, look at the water resources. Look at the air. It's free, nobody owns the air, so let's pollute it. Nobody can charge you for polluting the air. Nobody is responsible for the air. I think that's how we make money around the world. This is how capital is invested around the world. And unless we look at it from that perspective, it's not going to change. I don't think this is an issue of awareness. This is camouflaging the issue. I think this is an issue of having a deal with the capital, the owners of capital, and how they invest it in terms of the rules of the game going forward. Profit maximization and short-term results have driven a lot of economic activity in the world. And we are today in a very difficult spot because of that. Now, if we come and talk about Islamic finance and is it uniquely positioned to add value, and I think absolutely, not because Islam is a better or a different religion. I think all religions around the world speak the same language. The similarities are between 80 and 90%. But in our particular case, we emphasize Islamic finance because we have taken advantage of an opportunity gap out there, and we have brought in this business model. It's ethical finance. It's not about religion. We're not trying to promote people to become Muslims or change religion or become more faithful or pray 5 times a day. It is about the ethical foundations of doing business that we promote. And I think ethics themselves are the answer to everything that we do. They will improve sustainability. If you bring ethical practices into businesses, then short-term profitability becomes challenged a bit. You cannot pollute the water as you please. You cannot pollute the air as you please because it's simply unethical. And Islamic banks who promote ethics, their foundations prevent them from financing projects that are bad for the environment. We simply cannot do it. It goes against our rules. So if it is environmentally friendly, okay, it passes the first test. If it is destructive to the environment, even if it's building a Sharia-compliant business or product, if it's bad for the environment, we simply will not touch it. And I think this is the kind of an ethical business model that I believe is a big part of a solution that we so badly need. Now, if you look at incentives and disincentives, I believe the regulators, and unfortunately they've all gone, but the regulators need to bring incentives that will cost them nothing to help us finance feasible green projects. And let me explain what I mean by that. If there is a residential project, real estate, building 5,000 homes, and if those 5,000 homes deploy solar energy and insulation technologies, that will save energy. And if we go and finance that project, I believe the central bank should say, if you're financing a green project, the capital allocation should be less. So we, by regulation, have to allocate 12% capital to projects. If it's green, you get a discount. You allocate, for example, 10% capital or 6% capital. And if we allocate less capital, it means we can price it less. It becomes less expensive. And that is a direct injection of cash into the green economy. Conversely, if you finance red projects, the opposite of green, I'm not sure if red is the opposite of green, but it doesn't matter, okay?
Brown, I think they usually call them, but red is good.
If you finance red projects, the capital should be 15% and not 12%.
Are you seeing that kind of regulatory incentive for the profit maximization conundrum that you raised earlier? Because you raised quite eloquently the fact that capitalism tends to profit more from industries where the externalities are borne by society, and yet the reverse doesn't
capital
seem to be true.
Capital deployment has, in universities, and I'm a graduate of finance, I'm a student of finance, we have been taught to maximize profitability. And what we need to inject into, there's nothing wrong in profitability. That's how the economy runs, and we love capital, and we love to make money, and we don't like to pay taxes. That's fine, okay? But the issue here is not that. The issue here is bring ethics into the formula.
Just a quick question on that ethics definition there. Where does ethics start and end there? I mean, you could make an argument about the ethics of...
You know who is the biggest proponent of ethics around the world? It's the young people. The youth. The young people around the world, it doesn't matter what religion they are, it doesn't matter what color they are, it doesn't matter what race they have, they are the biggest supporters of ethics. And if you look at the movies that are, you've seen lots of movies coming up with Walt Disney, they always say that no animals were hurt in this movie. For whom? For the young people. Because the young people do not like to see things that are destructive to the environment. They're the biggest opponents of the fur industry and leather and animal cruelty and all of that stuff. So the young people are extremely supportive of ethics, of sustainability, and women.
You can do everything virtually now, so you don't
I'm
need,
just being very
animals.
transparent with you.
Yeah.
Women are a huge supporter, big fans of the environment, of ethical practices in business. So why do I bring these two things? I think those are two massive segments around the world. Women are 50% of the world, and youth represent a growing percentage in the world.
Okay.
And that's a big constituency. And we have to be mindful that now in the digital world, where we have WhatsApp and internet and Google and whatnot, all of those two segments are going to create a big movement. It's happening whether we like it or not. And the movement is going to be like an avalanche. They will dictate on us, the business communities, stronger ethical practices and more sustainable practices. So I would say right now it's an opportunity for us to be a positive and a strong mover into that space, but over time we will be aggressively pushed into that space by the youth and the women.
Great,
all around the world.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mahmoud. We're going to go over, we're going to ask Omar to talk to us about where the intersection is between responsible investment and Islamic finance from the perspective of a fund manager. Omar, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So to put those into the right camp, so Islamic finance is based on three core elements. One is industry exclusion, so we exclude so-called sin industries, alcohols, weapons, tobacco, gambling. And from a portfolio perspective, obviously that hurts, that takes optionality away. We have leverage ratios and cash ratios, so we do not put our money to companies which are over-leveraged or hoard cash. And we don't use fixed income products as a tool to allocate the money, so we try to avoid interest rate-based businesses. On the responsible side, on the sustainable side, we have less clarity when it comes to the definitions. There's all kinds of terms around. One of the main ones is the UN Global Compact values. The values of the UN are human rights, labor law, environment, anti-corruption, and corporates which are in breach are considered not sustainable. This is, again, something that tends to cost money in terms of performance. However, what kind of compensates is the so-called ESG approach. So you assess companies by their performance on the environmental, social, and governance topics. That is a so-called best-in-class approach. So look at specific examples. You have a mining company. You need to understand what is material for that mining company. Do not compare a mining company to a software company. Maybe here you find energy consumption, water consumption, wastewater management, accidents per 100,000, a big topic. On the bank or software company, maybe governance or other technologies more relevant. So the intersection is common sense values. Islamic religion, as any other religion or humanism, is based on common sense, and we understand those. Perhaps what I see as main disruptors, it kind of takes us a little bit away from the ethical approach and more into profitability, is the key things which are a zero interest rate environment. So we operate in a world where 60% of the world's money goes into fixed income, or used to go, US treasuries, gilts, bonds, and so on. That has come almost to zero. So this money will have to find a new home, and within the 5 asset classes, equity is the most likely one. So coming to Dr. Sethi's point, fixed income is very much about risk transferring, something that's not aligned with Islamic values. Equity is about risk sharing. So we have a natural flow of capital that kind of moves towards the spirit of Islamic investing. The second one is the use of non-financial information. So we now are flooded with big data, which is very essential for Islamic finance because you need to understand corporates. It's not just good enough to say you do alcohol, weapons, tobacco, gambling, or whatever. You need to understand what does the company do and in which way. And through the emergence of big data, we now have a much better grip on this question. And thirdly is how you express your views of investing, be it sustainable or Islamic. So are you doing derivatives, shorting? Do you use leverage? Or you actually do use real cash instruments that make sure that the money goes to companies and creates goods and services and jobs. It is not just to an index and gives you the false illusion that it is sustainable or Islamically invested. So these three things, equity, the new fixed income, the use of non-financial information through big data, and the right instrument that allocates the money to the right purpose is the three big trends that is moving towards Islamic finance. However, if you compare Islamic finance to sustainable finance, while both are very much aligned, both have not succeeded yet. Being realistic, when we talk about Islamic asset management, we talk about 0.2% of the world's money. It's a non-event. When we talk about sustainable ethical investing, it's just green finance. Again, it's just more, for certain purposes, but it's not mainstream yet. My thesis is that both are at a breakthrough point. Both are like what electric cars used to be 20 years ago. Interesting, but not really efficient. Something for nerds on the side that you didn't really care about. And suddenly it becomes cool, it becomes interesting. It becomes like for women, for young, for everybody who has the right mindset. And the technology is there. And then it becomes something that becomes mainstream. So my point would be Islamic finance, ESG, if would be used in a profit-oriented and reasonable way, it become the mainstream of finance going forward.
Great, thanks for that, Omar. Interesting, but not yet efficient. That seems like a good place to maybe come back to afterwards. But let's bring in Nida to talk about, we heard earlier some presentations on the Sustainable Development Goals, a number of big picture global initiatives that are happening around sustainability. What do you think that means at the moment for Islamic finance? Is that penetrating into the discussions that are happening in the Islamic finance sector? Can you give us a bit of a feeling for how that might be starting to sort of change views amongst Islamic finance investors?
Thank you, Hugh, for the question. And a very good question, actually. From Islamic Development Bank Group's perspective, and I represent the private sector arm of Islamic Development Bank Group, of which there are 53 member countries for ICD and 57 globally, it definitely is becoming more mainstream. So as a multilateral development bank with an Islamic edge, one would argue we are absolutely married to and overwhelmingly married to the Sustainable Development Goals. And from a grassroots level, one would argue as a multilateral, we should be immersing all of our activities in trying to achieve all of the above. All 17 of those goals that you saw on screen earlier today. But just bring it down to what actually are we doing and what are we trying to push from our perspective in Islamic finance. Look, Islamic banking, one of the channels for us as ICD is to try and mobilize private sector funding through mobilizing Islamic finance, to try and be inclusive. That's what our main goal has been over the past few years and going forward in the next few years. We believe inclusiveness is a cornerstone to sustainability. So bringing in the unbanked, the underbanked, etc. And we find that we can do this through opening of windows, of Islamic windows, a conversion of Islamic banks, or introducing new Islamic banks in our member countries, or indeed non-member countries for that matter. And what has that done for us? I mean, we have a monitoring and evaluation department. Because we're a multilateral development bank, we have to answer to our shareholders as from the perspective of what are we doing from a developmental perspective. And many of those monitoring and evaluation KPIs fall exactly along the lines of these 17 sustainable development goals. So, reducing poverty, inclusiveness, women empowerment, clean energy, infrastructure, all of these things are very, very key to many of our member countries. Now, if I just take one region for a minute, to look at Africa, we understand from all the studies out there that there is about $98 billion of infrastructure requirements every year for the next 10 years. And trade within Africa, intra-Africa, is standing at some single-digit number, whereas in other continents it's much higher, in the teens or high mid-20s. So just by doing simple things like providing infrastructure, providing electricity to those that need it most so that they don't have to walk miles to get water for their agricultural products, will boost and hit tick the boxes along the lines of all of the sustainable goals, but at the same time to be able to do it through an Islamic finance manner. Now, why do I talk about Islamic finance? Very simply because, as Tirad said, as Dr. Zeti said, in fact, all of our panelists said, you know, Islamic finance is supposed to finance the real economy, and it does. It finances the real economy. You cannot, you must have a economic transaction, as Dr. Zeti said. And so, from an Islamic finance perspective at a grassroots level, it attaches itself to all of those things. So to answer your question, Islamic finance has always existed, but now there's a lot more focus being made on addressing the very specific ESG-related, green-related elements and sustainable-related elements within Islamic finance. So, for example, when we set up new windows or conversion of Islamic banks, we make sure there is a deliverable work stream around governance, around transparency, around disclosure, around CSR. All of these things we maybe didn't do 5 years ago, 7 years ago, but we're doing that now. We've integrated into our deliverables for such things. Similarly, when we advise governments around sukuk issuance, you know, we work with them to find out exactly what the use of proceeds of those are going to be, infrastructure projects, et cetera, and to the extent possible, we try and get them to be as green as possible in terms of where the use of those proceeds are going to be. We have to remember that many of these developing countries are, you know, about 30, 40 years behind where we are in Asia, in the Middle East, etc. So we have to give them a little bit of time to get there, but it's on their agenda as well. They would like to be as green as possible.
Great, thanks for that, Nida. Dr. Zeti, I'm going to come to you because Mr. Mahmood kind of threw down the gauntlet to governments and regulators. He said, listen, we're interested in doing more green and sustainable finance, but you've got to help us properly. You've got to put down the incentives that will enable capital to flow both sustainably and financially. Can you give us a sort of feel for whether you see that kind of action coming through from governments and regulators at the moment, and central banks even for that matter?
Well, if you're really going to bring the private sector where there's massive resources and there's limited resources within the public sector, and therefore if you're going to mobilize this to participate in green financing and investment in infrastructure projects that promote and encourage sustainability, the role of the private sector in driving this is very key. And therefore, it is very vital to have the right, I agree, the incentive structure has to be there. Now, yes, you can provide incentives, for example, the capital allocation and so on, for investments in the right direction. However, there are other impediments, for example, on the incentive structure, such as subsidies that are given to certain industries that are not environmentally sustainable or friendly. For example, in fossil energy sources, if they are given subsidies, for example, then this is going to result in incentive structure that does not encourage investment activity. And the other aspect that is very challenging for these kind of projects is the upfront investment that is usually required is very costly. The amount of financing and the allocation is so at this initial stage of the investment, again, if there is some support that provides it, and then as it takes off, then it would facilitate greater investment activity in these kind of sustainable activities. So removing impediments, but having the standards and rules, and the private sector, those investors that come in, to either take equity or to acquire the bonds that raise the financing for these long gestation investments. They want to be assured, as I mentioned earlier, of the governance process, the risk management, and the viability of the project. And
do you get a sense that governments are starting to make that managed transition from fossil fuels to a greener economy, both in terms of employment, in terms of subsidy changes, in terms of governance? Is that starting to happen, and is COP21, has that been the catalyst, the nationally determined contributions?
It is, all throughout Asia, and I believe in the Middle East from hearing, and then of course in the industrial economies, in the more advanced economies, it's all started. And this is because of the increased recognition of what certain investments are doing to the environment and to the sustainability of economies, from pollution to climate change and all the other aspects.
Yeah. Omar, you wanted to, let's bring in Omar and Mr. Mahmood very, very quickly. Just some responses on that, and then we'll...
Sure, so we see on the regulatory side actually great progress. A great example is the European Union has passed a law that asks every pension fund in the European part of the world to consider sustainability criteria, in particular the environmental topic. So as of 2017, a significant amount of money will have to take that into consideration. We've seen the Malaysia regulation encouraging public sector funds and others to consider sustainability. We've seen the laws change in Japan. In the US, it has begun. So that is a global movement, partly initiated by COP21, but also through grassroots movements. However, I believe, particularly in the Muslim world, the biggest opportunity lies with the sovereign wealth funds. If you consider Norway's governmental fund and its commitment to sustainability as a significant driver of that agenda, we still need to see the sovereign wealth fund of the Middle East and other Muslim countries to take a similar step by allocating 10, 20, or 50% of its money into Islamic or sustainable compliant investment. That would give a huge boost.
How's the progress been so far with the Islamic sovereign wealth funds? Are they making many visible statements about sustainability?
So in their defense, Abdullah can answer this better than I, but in their defense, they had an issue with Islamic finance in the past. They saw it as greenwashing, not credible, not performing. Look at all the big, look at Sama, probably somebody's here, 800 billion AUM, about half in US Treasuries and half in conventional funds. We don't see Islamic finance there represented at all. Probably the same is true in the UAE and other Islamic countries. So there to say, look, Islamic finance is ready, sustainable finance is ready to deliver performance, to be transparent, to be part of your agenda. Why don't you start giving 10% of your money into an Islamic compliant financial system? This would give a tremendous boost to the whole movement.
Abdullah, briefly on that, and then Mr. Mahmood will bring in.
Well, I think, again, when it comes to utilizing Islamic finance tools for sustainable projects, I would say one of the very proven, I would say, products were Sukuk, and Sukuk, in my opinion, my personal opinion, Sukuk are good because they engage, the individual, the sovereign, as well as the private and public sector institutions in that experience. And if the Sukuk are geared towards sustainable projects, so raising capital to actually invest in these, whether they're infrastructure projects or others, but which are sustainable, which encourage sustainability, then you have the perfect product. And we have seen sovereigns go to that route. We have seen governments utilizing Islamic bonds such as Sukuk to invest in these areas. So this is one, and this is not the only, in my opinion, it's not the only product that one can utilize to invest in sustainable projects. But Sukuk has certainly proven over the last 2 to 3 years that it is one of the ideal products.
Great, thanks for that.
Yes, if I could add that recently we had our sovereign wealth fund issue a sukuk of that nature to finance education, which is to promote also sustainability, and it was drew tremendous interest, oversubscribed, and so on. So there's tremendous potential on that front.
So there's stuff in the pipeline, as they say. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Dr. Zetti.
I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, money, has a universal feature. It goes where it's wanted and it stays where it's well treated. So, for money to rush into green, sustainable projects, the incentives and the framework around those incentives from the regulators needs to walk the talk. There's a lot of talk, but frankly speaking, we need to see the regulators put in place incentives so that these green projects, which require sometimes a larger capital investment, like I mentioned, those homes that use solar energy, it is more expensive to build a home like that. It's more capital going out. So we need these regulations to make green projects look equally appealing as non-green projects. And we need the regulators to pull out the incentives. I agree with Dr. Zetti. Pull out the incentives that have been accumulated over the decades in industries that are not ecologically friendly, and just pull it out. So I think things will equalize over time. Also, the private sector's involvement is important. We have to take the initiative. Yes, I spoke about regulators putting incentives because they're the ones who regulate incentives. But the private sector must take the initiative and must be very proactive. I can give you as an example, this is a bit of a marketing pitch, Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, Adib. We have an annual event, it's called Ethical Finance Innovation Challenge Awards. 4 years ago, we have launched an annual competition where we actually give money, we give awards to winners for competitors who come up with ethical finance ideas, innovation. And a lot of that is going into the sustainable space. In fact, Dr. Zetti is our guest tomorrow, and she will be handing out those awards. This year we had 100 applicants who have competed, and there are 3 winners that will be announced tomorrow. Yes, it is a marketing pitch about Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, and if you want to come, it is at the JW Marriott tomorrow at 6 p.m. You're all welcome to come there. But that kind of an initiative has to be replicated throughout the private sector. We have a role to play to promote ethics, and ethics will drive sustainability. That's what I think we should do.
That's the kind of marketing that I allow usually on panels. We're going to wrap up here. I'd like Dr. Zetti to talk to us about a private sector initiative. There's a sort of effectively a mixture, really, in some ways. The Responsible Finance Institute that you are involved in is partnering with UNEP FI to increase the education and awareness of this bridge between Islamic finance and sustainability, sustainable finance. Can you talk to us about that briefly? And then I'd like to ask each of our panelists to give us their sort of their tweet, if you like, of what they think needs to be done to make the move forward, as we heard earlier, from Islamic finance to finance much more green and sustainable finance. Dr. Zetti first, and then we'll go over to Nida.
I have been involved with this institute because this is a cause that's so important. It provides a platform, it provides all forms of sustainable finance, and not only Islamic finance, ethical finance, responsible finance, green finance, all they've brought us together. And the sharing of knowledge and providing a platform to discuss this, and what has been the areas in which we can draw on each other's experience and elements that can advance this agenda forward. And I do believe that this is key to heightening the awareness and not only of the private sector but of governments, so that they put in place the incentive structure, and how important it is and how damaging it is to economies, the environment, and social economic well-being of communities. So in going forward, for Islamic finance, I believe it's important to have scale. Right now we don't, and we need scale to be able to take on large ticket items and so on. So generally in all the other ethical finance and responsible finance, it's to build up the capability as well, and to be able to leverage on technology. And these are the key elements, I believe, that can advance this agenda forward.
Great, thanks for that, Dr. Zetti. Just run through of all our panelists. Nida, give us your very brief summary of what you'd like to see that might push Islamic finance more towards green and sustainable finance.
If you ask me to tell you it in one word, I would say what I said before, which is inclusion. I think inclusion is cornerstone to sustainability. It's fundamental to equality. It's very important for socioeconomic development, inequality, empowerment, all of the above. So that would be my one thing. How are we at ICD going to try and push for it? So come next year, when you ask me how have we addressed ourselves against the developmental goals, we're looking at thematic funds around food security, renewable energy, healthcare, education, infrastructure, mobilizing our own money, mobilizing other private sector money, as well as concessionary finance from things like WAF, Qard Hassan, and other private sector entities.
Great, sounds very exciting. Omar.
So from my point of view, Islamic finance needs first and foremostly be more transparent. So to go away from the usual ways of documentation, calling interest rates management fees, and other ways to be creative to make it Islamic compliant. We need to be true to the values, and we need to be performance oriented. Above all, I would argue that if you remember, we all do, I guess, the horrible incident in Bangladesh when the roof collapsed and 1,100 people died, or when the 60 women died in the fire just prior to that. Funny enough, these were Islamic compliant investments, because we in Islamic finance take this as an implicit, where they're producing garments, but we did not ask how were these women treated, how about labor law, how about the environmental impact of these workers. And here the opportunity of Islamic finance is to embrace common sense values, the UN Global Compact values, human rights, labor law, environment, anti-corruption, which is clearly dear and important to Islamic values, but not yet implemented in Islamic finance. So this cooperation, this getting together is the biggest opportunity for all of us.
Great, thanks for that, Omar. Mr. Mahmood.
I mean, one can say a lot, but I think I would like to echo what Dr. Zetti said. I mean, for us to really be able to add value on a global basis, we need to improve the scalability of our business model. Right now, our business model is bespoke banking, and it's very, very difficult to industrialize a bespoke business. So to achieve scale, we need standardization. And I think we're heading in the right direction. We've been somewhat slow, but I think we'll make it.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Alawi.
Well, I'll only say that in order to truly, achieve the goals of sustainable development, we do need to see more of the public and private sector partnerships. I mean, this is the model, that the UAE adopted. Even within the Islamic economy sphere, our strategy, it's about working with the private sector. The government sets the framework, it creates the environment and the ecosystem, but it will not be able to succeed if we are not going to be partnering, with the private sector, who is a key, contributor to the end goal. So we need to see more of that happening.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks to a wonderful set of panelists who've been very game to put across some really important developments in a very compressed space of time. And if we could show our appreciation to all of them, thank you very much indeed.